The following is a short presentation of the life of George A. Cason based on the articles and ads of the local newspaper, the Manatee River Journal of Bradentown. George A. Cason was born about 1847. In Manatee County, there were two George Casons, so the paper identified our subject as George A. Cason. The Manatee River Journal said that he had homesteaded on 85 acres sometime before 1884 and was listed as a landowner in the Gazetteer of 1884. He operated one of the first general stores in Miakka, which doubled as a polling place. Active in politics, Cason was a primary election manager for Miakka and elected county commissioner in 1889. In February of 1890, he closed his store in Miakka and moved to Sarasota, where he opened a store in the Grable building on the corner of Main Street and Pineapple. His store in Miakka was taken over by Reverend Tom Stephens. In Sarasota, he blended in socially, and one article said that he was a hit at an ice cream social. In 1891, he took in a pauper to his house, Jesse Billings, who died 3 months later. George handled his funeral. The people in and around Sarasota were money poor, so the retailers had to take in furs and produce in exchange for supplies. These they would ship to Tampa and sell. Business was good, and in 1893 he disposed of 130 sacks of grain and 30 bales of hay between December 27th and January 1st. In September 1893, there was trouble brewing at Cason's store. John Fletcher had bought supplies at Cason's store with a check from a Northern Commission House. The check's bank failed, and the check went to protest. George called Fletcher into the store on a Saturday evening and tried to get compensated for the check and protest fees. An argument occurred, ending with Cason chasing Fletcher out of the store with a hatchet. Fletcher came back on Monday to pay the amount due, but Cason would not write the receipt until the money was in his hands. This caused another argument, and Cason went into the store and returned with a double-barrel shotgun loaded with buckshot. Fletcher drew a .44 caliber revolver and shot twice, wounding Cason in the back. Cason fired his shotgun and caused a flesh wound under Fletcher's arm and under his left lung. Both shooters required surgery, and death was a possibility. The Manatee River Journal on October 19th of 1893 reported that both recovered from their wounds. This is Lower Main Street. Cason's store was in the last building on the west side of the street from 1890 to 1894. The Whitaker store was across Lower Main Street. You can barely see the two-story building on the right side of the picture. The Whitakers left Sarasota in the 1890s, leaving George A. Cason's store as the only merchandise store for a period of time. Note, this 1918 picture was taken from the City Water Tower on Lemon Avenue. George A. Cason and wife lived in a two-story house across the street from the Methodist Church. In 1917, the Women's Club remodeled the house into a farmer's bungalow, which allowed out-of-town patrons to rest up a bit while in town. This is a George A. Cason ad from the Manatee River Journal, dated March 22, 1894. In April 1894, Cason purchased the Florida Mortgage and Investment Company's two-story store and leased their dock. He moved his store into the old company store and opened it in May 1894. Harry Heigl took possession of the old Grable building at 5 Points. He must have been doing good business because he was reported arriving in Bradentown with a driver in his new turnout. Cason moved his store to the two-story building on the left side of this picture. History of this building. A.E. Willard, with Tallahassee backers, incorporated the Florida Fish Oil and Fertilizing Company in 1882. Willard then built a two-story plant near the current corner of Main Street and Gulf Stream. He also constructed a small wharf for fishing boats to dock. According to the Story of Sarasota by Carl H. Grismer, it produced up to 10 barrels of fish oil a day. By 1885, the Florida Mortgage and Investment Company, or FMIC, had possession of the building and dock. Getting ready for the Scottish colonists, the building was turned into the company store. Carrie S. Abbey, the postmaster, operated the post office from 1894 to 1899 in the back of Cason's store building. The Cason building and post office is to the left of the DeSoto Hotel. Another view of the Heigl building, previously the Cason store building. Bradentown businessmen buy out George A. Cason, Manatee River Journal, August 25, 1898. Not sure why Cason sold out. Maybe the offer was more than he could refuse. Mr. Corsi had business interests in Bradentown, and he stayed there to manage them. He sought an incursion into the Sarasota market and placed Mr. Blakely there to manage the new business. However, most businessmen in Bradentown only dealt in cash and credit. They were not used to taking in animal skins and potatoes for merchandise. A few months later, in January, Cason bought back the business. This is another ad of George A. Cason from the Manatee River Journal, dated June 1, 1899. George Cason's wife had a stroke and died in July 1899 and was buried in Miakka. By the end of August, it was business as usual. He traveled to Tampa for more goods for the store. In September, he has his store painted, and in November, Albritton and Scott opened an oyster house on his wharf. At the beginning of 1900, George married Miss Annie Wallace of Sarasota. Harry Heigl purchased the Cason Wharf in April 1900. It provided a better location for the steamer Mistletoe with passengers to arrive and depart. In November 1900, Cason was planning to have a residence built next to his store since he had rented out his house on Pineapple Avenue. Mr. and Mrs. Cason went out to Miakka for a couple days of camping in July 1901. Mrs. M.A. Prime, George Prime's mother, looked after the Cason store while they were away. George participated in the meetings to incorporate the town of Sarasota, but appears to have left Sarasota about 1903. Harry Heigl purchased the store building at that time. In August of 1909, the local paper noted that George was living in Plant City and running another store. 3 years later, the Sarasota Times said he was living in Bradley Junction, where he ran a country store. George A. Cason died in Wauchula in 1917. He was over 70 years old. Thank you for listening to these presentations.